how you describe sustainable is farming that is beneficial to all the parties involved. It's beneficial to the animal's health, the land's health, the eater's health. It's beneficial to the farmer, and it's beneficial to the community.
Welcome to the Wise Traditions Podcast, sponsored by the Weston A. Price Foundation for Wise Traditions in Food, Farming, and the Healing Arts. We are your source for scientific knowledge and traditional wisdom to help you achieve optimal health.
I'm your host, Hilda Labrador. Our guest today is farmer Jesse Straight, owner of Whiffletree Farm in Warrenton, Virginia. Jesse is a young father of 5 who is committed to sustainable farming. You will be inspired as you hear his story today and learn about what shaped his farming and his life's philosophy. Before we get into the conversation, I have an important announcement. Sally Fallon Morell, the head of the Weston A. Price Foundation, is coming to Washington, D.C. to speak about nourishing traditional diets on Sunday, May 1st. You will want to be there. The event will be held at Woodrow Wilson Senior High School from 5 to 7 p.m. A $10 donation is recommended. For more details, go to westonaprice.org and look under events. Mark your calendar now so you can hear Sally speak about how to nurture and maintain your health and the health of your loved one. Support for Wise Traditions comes from the Nutritional Therapy Association, foundational holistic nutrition education, real education for people who believe in real food. Go to nutritionaltherapy.com. And listeners like you, your donations and membership contributions help support projects like this podcast. And now, on to the interview recorded recently in Washington, D.C. with Jesse Straight. Welcome to the podcast, Jesse.
Thank you, Hilda.
I'm glad you're here today.
Yeah, me too.
So I understand you didn't set out to be a farmer. Tell us your story.
Sure. So I was born and raised in Warrenton, Virginia, and I had a pretty typical suburban upbringing. We lived near farms, but we didn't live on a farm. By the time I graduated from high school, farming was not at all on the radar. I was very torn with what I was going to do with my life, but farming wasn't in that mix. So I eventually graduated from UVA, studying religious studies and pre-med. Decided I did not want to go to med school, but again, still confused. Then after college, a friend of my wife and myself sent us a book by Wendell Berry, A World Lost. And that was an important turning point because Wendell Berry really presents a vision of the good life that centers around the home. So in modern culture, the home has become mostly a place of consumption, like where you go after work and where you consume entertainment and everything else. And so he presented a contrarian idea where the home ought to be a place with flourishing productivity and where good things are made and not just consumed, and that the family bond is not around just consuming things together, but around producing things together. And that sounded really attractive to me. And I like that idea of the life centered around the home, around the neighborhood, where work and family and children and the elderly all come together. So again, the modern life is very disintegrated, where all these different parts of our lives are put over here and there and there. It just made sense to me that the closer you can bring together family, work, and home, the three of those become happier.
What an interesting distinction. I never thought about that before.
Yeah.
The home is the center of consumption as opposed to productivity and connection.
Yeah. So, even simple things, just like how you use your kitchen. I mean, a lot of people might say that, we have all these wonderful kitchens all over the United States, and so many of them are really underutilized where, processed food is open out of a package, and as opposed to, real cooking where you're, taking whole chickens and, making dishes and making your own stock and making your own lard, and the good that does for the family and the friends that receive those meals and food. And so, and of course, there's all kinds of other things that can be done in the home. All of our basic needs can be, raised or processed. That idea of the family working together and those bonds being productive bonds, not just consumptive bonds, was really compelling for me. And basically that was like, yes, that makes a lot of sense. I like that. And of course, in Wendell Berry's stories, a lot of the characters are farmers, and farming fits really well within that idea of the good life. Of course, you don't have to be a farmer to live that life. It makes sense. You walk out your door and there's your work. Also with farming, even more so non-industrial farming, there's a lot of variety of tasks that can incorporate children very well, or the elderly, or disabled people. So it really can include a lot of one's family and neighborhood in ways that bring people together. So that was, I guess, one thing is like that makes a lot of sense within that vision. I guess the other two things were I just began to sort of, as I was trying to discern, what am I going to do with my life? I really wanted to do something meaningful and good. And I was torn 10 different ways. And so as I began to think about, my own history and what things I'd been sort of naturally inclined to in my past, for example, like in high school, a friend and I started a landscaping business, which is a glorified way of saying we drove around a 1986 Civic with a lawnmower in the back. But nonetheless, whereas some of my friends maybe were working at, a fast food restaurant or something, I was outside working, doing physical work, working for myself, interacting with the customers directly and sort of being somewhat embedded in the community, like getting to know our people that we worked for and their neighbors. And I really enjoyed that. And also in college, I worked in the summers for my father, who had a painting business. So I was painting in the summer and I really enjoyed the work. A lot of people, might be like, this is not good work or whatever. And the opposite, like I really enjoyed gaining those skills and becoming a better painter and seeing, satisfaction of how things looked when I was done working. And I could see around me that not everyone was that way and was inclined that way. So, there's maybe something to this, like physical outdoor work, working for myself. And then the third thing being just learning about the need for it, learning sort of the state of food in America or Virginia or Warrenton, whatever you want to say, that the status quo had become something that wasn't good enough, that, both in terms of for the health of the people eating the food and the land and the animals and the communities affected, that this was something that really had sort of gone in a bad direction for too long. And so here's an area where I could do some good. There was a need.
But again, to clarify, it's not that you grew up with your father as a farmer or working on a farm. To you, it was pretty foreign.
Yeah, completely. So in fact, my father, my whole life, had a vegetable garden, and I don't think I ever helped him with the vegetable garden. And to his credit, he's never brought that up to me since. So yeah, I wasn't raised in a farming family. It wasn't on the radar. Yeah, so basically there was sort of that Windleberry moment. Mm-hmm. And then after that, I began sort of reading more books, visiting farmers. And then eventually, my wife and I were living in Charlottesville after I graduated from UVA. And we started a little organic veggie CSA, very small potatoes kind of thing.
Did you sell potatoes?
Sorry for the bad pun. And that was a great experience. I really enjoyed it. We made very little money. So at the time, we were expecting our first child. I knew, okay, it's time to get serious. I need to provide for a family and make a living. So that eventually got me into reading one of Joel Salatin's books. And I knew who he was. I'd visited the farm before. I'd never actually sat down and read one of his books. And up until that point, from my experience with the vegetable farms, like, okay, I really like the work, but it's hard to make a living. Kind of the very normal, stereotypical perspective on farming. Mm-hmm. Great work, but hard way to make a living, son. So I was at that time thinking about sort of backdoor ways I could get farming into my vocation. So have more of a mainstream vocation, like say become a teacher and start a school that grows its own food. Or, I was always thinking about how do I like make a living and then kind of sneak in agriculture. And when I read Joel's books, he really clearly lays out an inspiring farm model where the farming is regenerative of the fertility and the health of the land, the food, and the community. But also alongside that is really nuts and bolts business. So here's not only how you do this really inspiring farming, but here's how you make a living doing it, which of course the two have to go together for it to be truly sustainable. So once I sort of read that model, both farm and business, the emotional floodgates came down. I was like, forget the teaching, forget the whatever else, like sneaky way I was going to try and, have agriculture be part of my life. Like, I just want to be a farmer. Mm-hmm. And so at that point, we sort of made the decision, okay, we're going to really make a go at this and kind of follow Joel's model here and kind of follow the path that he's laid out. So that was 2009 that we moved back to Warrenton, my hometown. And again, part of that whole Windleberry idea of coming back to your roots and being close with your family and where you're from and where you have connections, sort of reintegrating the life that wants to pull you apart. That's what we did. So that was in April 2009. We moved back and we slowly began to build. And it was very much, trial and error and looking at a book and out in the field. And because I wanted to do an internship with Polyface, but we were married and had a baby, and that's no family housing for interns. So that wasn't a possibility. So basically we just started little bit by bit. So we would get, a small number of broiler chickens and, learn on those chickens and build up our skills, build up our production, and at the same time build up our customer base. So we started with the broilers, then added little laying hens and build it up, and little pigs and build it up, and turkeys and build it up, and beef and build it up, and just kind of step by step, making lots of mistakes along the way, and also with lots of help. Joel and Daniel Saladin have been, really very gracious and answering my phone calls and returning my emails. And I would go down there when we were first getting started to learn how to process chickens with them. And so had a lot of help along the way too.
Well, I'm glad you had help along the way, because it sounds to me like it was very ideal, or the things you read in the book, in these various books, were very idealized. Did it seem like it was unattainable, or did you think, okay, I can do this? Were there times of discouragement? Tell us more.
I think I would have felt really out on a limb by myself if I hadn't had both Joel Saladin's books as well as his example. So especially for myself, if I've been raised on a farm and I had those fundamental knowledge and skills, that wouldn't have been so much the case. But being, totally not from that world and needing to provide for a family, I wasn't a single bachelor that, could kind of mess up my own life. I could mess up other people's lives too. So I think I didn't feel irresponsible, mostly because I was like, look, here's a business plan. You can see step 1, step 2, step 3. And if you work hard and do a really good job and take care of your animals and take care of your land and take care of your customers, I don't see why that couldn't work for me too. So I think that gave me a lot of confidence, and I'm pretty sure I wouldn't have done that without Joel Saladin's example and books to sort of give a newbie like myself confidence to say, okay, here's a path I can follow too. So that being said, yes, it would have been great if I could have grown up in a farming family, had all these skills, really kind of mundane things like just working with tools and knowing how to use certain tools well, and seeing how animals respond to different times of weather. When, if this rain is a serious rain, I need to get out there at 2 a.m. to put straw down for the chickens, or this is fine, they're going to be fine. Little things like that you learn with your land and you learn the animals. Yeah. And also, it would have been nice to have done an internship. I'm really proud of our internship, and I basically have modeled it with my former self in mind. Like, what would I have liked to have known that I didn't have the luxury of, learning, because I couldn't have done an internship program. I was beyond that stage in life. That would have been great, but that's just not what was in store for me.
So you had Joel, you had books.
Yeah.
And yet, as a young new farmer, you said you've made a mistake or two. Tell us the story just to help it be grounded in reality.
Sure. Yeah. We've made plenty of mistakes. I'd say probably the most devastating was in Superstorm Sandy, which I guess is now maybe 3 years ago or something. And I didn't know it, but I didn't have adequate shelter for our turkeys. And of course, we didn't know how bad Superstorm Sandy was going to be beforehand. But it was, 3 days of cold, driving rain. And there was just not enough shelter for the turkeys to get under cover. And with chickens and turkeys, if their feathers get wet, they lose all their insulative value. And so they can quickly go into hypothermia. So I discovered that turkeys are not okay and that they are dying and in the process of dying. It's just myself. I'm out there with the truck picking up turkeys that are on their way to expiring, if not already dead. And this is, I think, a week before slaughter. This is like the most emotional low point I've ever had, where I was so frustrated with myself for, hurting these animals that I'd worked so hard to raise, and just for the fact of hurting these animals, like you would any animal, even if you didn't own it. And then just, also the way I was like hurting my business, and the way, I was losing so much money involved. And also it was just miserable work. I mean, there was no part of my clothing that was not soaking wet in this driving, windy, cold rain. It's just the most miserable weather to work in. And it was, to the point where I had multiple times to resist, just sort of like kicking the truck and like, I don't know, walking somewhere, going away, just like giving up.
And that was due to your inexperience.
Yeah,
that you
like
hadn't
basically,
enough shelter
yeah, like
for
basically, I didn't know, okay, 3 days of cold driving rain, I need more shelter than this. So basically I was putting the turkeys in the truck and driving them to the barn, load after load, and, getting them out of the rain. And, so that was like, I put myself through misery where at this point I would have left the turkeys in a situation where they wouldn't have the shelter they needed. To testimony to how much we've been helped in that situation, somehow my parents got word of what I was doing. At that point, they were, I think, in their early 60s. And they came out, my mom and dad, and just jumped right in, didn't say a word. Were just helping me load turkeys in the back of the truck. I don't think any of us talked. And, we just sort of did what we had to do. And, but, that was a really deeply moving, kind act by them to help me, especially low point. And it was miserable work. And if I was 62, I hope to not be doing that work.
Definitely not. So that's a sad story. Tell
Yeah.
us a highlight since you've been farming. Like, has it been what Wendell Berry and others propose? And has it been a way of coming together with your family and your work?
Just being a startup business is its own challenge for any kind of startup. And there's a lot of work that goes in, long hours, and it's an uphill, climb. So that's probably pretty typical of anyone who's starting a small business. But yes, we moved back to Warrington to be near family, but also kind of naively idealistic of like, we believe in this idea kind of thing. And we didn't realize all the good that would come along with that until after the fact. So we didn't appreciate, we did it, like I said, sort of in naive idealism, but we've been surprised by and confirmed that I'm so glad we did this. And we were leaving a place, Charlottesville. We love Charlottesville. It's a great town. We have wonderful friends that we were so sad to leave. And even still, that decision has been confirmed over and over again with the kind of relationship we now have with my parents and my children with my parents and with all of our old family friends and all the places that I've grown up with that, I have a connection to not just people, but also places. And to be able to live among those people and places is really wonderful. So, and that score definitely been confirmed. And in terms of particularly the farming aspect, I am, on a regular basis excited about what we're doing. For example, there's different things about our work that affirm what we're doing is good. And, that could be the customers patting us on the back and be like, that's the best chicken I ever ate. Of course, that's wonderful to hear. Or like the animals can confirm what we're doing is good. So, when I move those chickens to fresh pasture, they will show me with their behavior that they are really happy, that they love that fresh bugs, the fresh grass.
We want to thank our sponsors, the Nutritional Therapy Association, foundational holistic nutrition education. NTA was founded on the teachings of Weston A. Price and the science of Dr. Francis M. Pottinger. Students in our seminars learn to correct nutritional imbalances from a holistic perspective, emphasizing the importance of properly prepared, nutrient-dense whole foods. Real education for people who believe in real food. Visit nutritionaltherapy.com. And listeners like you, on iTunes, Me245 wrote this review. I have been following the Weston Price method of eating for over 15 years. I have been able to effortlessly maintain a healthy weight. I have lots of energy and rarely get sick. I have no chronic illness, my face is clear, and I live a pain-free life. Traditional wisdom for eating is a critical part of the health and vitality puzzle. I am so excited for this podcast to help others feel great too. Thanks, Me245. We appreciate your kind words and support. And now back to the program.
Or the animals can also affirm what we're doing is good. So say when I move the beef cattle to fresh ground, I lift that electric wire and the thick, lush grass is in front of them and they kick up their heels and they jump in there and they're chomping away. They are telling me, we really like what you're doing. And for example, the land can affirm what we're doing. When I've moved that chicken shelter and I see the line where it was and where it wasn't, and I can see 2 weeks later where it was is that much thicker and greener and lusher. And that, again, is the land saying, good job, Jesse. I like what you're doing. And none of these things and none of this work would I claim to be perfect and all that. But there are some really affirming things, even like in our family life. Like I said, like the relationships we have with my parents and how they're integrated into the farm and with relationships with my children. And my 3 oldest children, who are basically old enough to walk in tall grass, each have a special work day where they come with me in the morning chores and do the chores with me. We have special one-on-one time together. And, I get to encourage their satisfaction in their work and say, hey, Josephine, look you didn't used to be able to do that last year. Now you can fill the chicken feeders and you couldn't do that before. And, you think you'll be able to teach Leon how to do that when he gets old enough? And you guys are helping me go so much faster. Like if I was doing this by myself, I wouldn't be done yet. And, I'm not going to say that it's totally perfect and that it's just like wonderful life on the farm and everything's great. But yes, there are those goods that can be had, and to some extent, we shoot for.
And the kind of farming you do isn't the big scale industrialized farming. Describe what you do exactly, or more or less.
Yeah, sure. So, we raise chickens for meat and eggs, turkeys, pork, and beef. And we are a small family farm. So that means, for example, this coming year, we'll raise and slaughter about 8,000 chickens, and we have about 2,000 laying hens, and we'll slaughter about 200 pigs, and have a beef herd of around 30 or 40 cattle, and we'll do about maybe 800 turkeys for Thanksgiving. So in some sense, that might sound like a lot, because if you're just a person with some hens in your backyard, that's 2,000 hens sounds like a lot. But if you compare that to an industrial farm that has hundreds of thousands of whatever, we're very small potatoes. I'd say in terms of comparing us to industrial farming, whether that's industrial organic or conventional industrial, the main difference for us is that our animals are rotated around in fresh pasture. So that's the thing that's the most difficult thing to turn into factoryized. That's really like intelligent and labor intensive. Like you need really good management to make that happen well. So that's not something, unlike a building where you throw a bunch of animals in there and you have all these automatic waters and feeders and everything's automatic. You can't do that on pasture. There's predators, there's the elements of the weather, there's the sort of subtle choreography of the animals in the pasture. You can't overgraze, you can't undergraze. That's sort of what husbandry is all about.
And this type of farming you're describing, is this what sustainable farming is?
I guess, what you would describe, how you describe sustainable is farming that is beneficial to all the parties involved. So it's beneficial to the animal's health, it's beneficial to the land's health, it's beneficial to the eater's health, it's beneficial to the farmer in terms of giving them a noble and sustainable way to live and to support their family. And it's beneficial to the community so that, the farm is not sort of the armpit of the community, but is the gem of the community. It's where people come and see beauty and good things and not smell and have poisons and smells that, make everyone live far away from it.
Right. Pesticides and things like that.
So basically that's one of our underlying principles is to benefit all parties involved. And we do that by paying attention to how nature works. Nature works in a particular way, and it's our job to pay attention to how that is so that we can set up our systems such that they thrive naturally. And again, that then creates this upward spiral where everything benefits, where not just the bottom line benefits, but the land, the animals, the eaters, the farmers, the community all benefit.
And why don't more farmers farm this way? If it's so good for the land and the farmer and the community, why don't more do it?
There's probably a lot of parts to that answer, but to take a crack at it, to some extent, it's cultural. It's what you've been raised as the right way of doing things. So it's education in terms of, well, this is the good way of farming, and whether it is or isn't actually the good way of farming is another issue. And then it also is partly because of what we, the consumers, demand. So if we're primarily demanding a low cost, then other considerations will not be taken seriously. So I think there's a lot of farmers out there who would say, oh yeah, I'd love to farm and benefit my land, but the kind of food that you want just makes me farm and hurt my land. And again, I don't mean to put all the blame on the consumer, but I think we as the consumers should take a big brunt of it because the farmer can only sell what people will buy. So the more that people say, you know what, I'll pay a little extra for you to actually rotate those animals on pasture and not put them on a concrete floor in a warehouse. I think I have a great life, and I'm sure other farmers would, love to get out of a poultry house and be outside in the beautiful pasture and see their animals thriving. And there's all kinds of satisfaction that goes along with that. So I don't think it's like people that disdain, the outdoors. And I think it's, again, partially cultural. This is what we've considered as good farming, and partially what the market has demanded.
Well, you talked about animals benefiting from this too. So I want to ask you a question. Earlier you said the turkeys were dying a week before slaughter. So how is this kind of farming good for the animals?
Yeah, so I guess there's kind of two issues here. One would be whether you think it's right to slaughter animals per se. And of course, that's up to you to decide. And if you think it's wrong, then it's always wrong. Of course, I don't think that's true. And I think there is a way to virtuously raise animals for people to eat as food. So that's one issue. Of course, that's probably too big for us to get into this here.
Maybe
but,
so.
but if we put that issue aside, the reason I was upset in regards for the animal was because they were suffering unnecessarily. When we slaughter an animal, we do it in such a way that it's as humane as possible. And dying of hypothermia in the elements is not a humane way to die. And also because of the waste. This is an animal that lived a noble life, now in this rain is dying a miserable death and is going to be wasted. Of course, not completely, I'm going to compost the animal. It's going to turn into soil and I'm going to put it back on the pasture. But that's not its best use. Mm-hmm. Its best use is to go to someone to make a really tasty and nutritious meal. So I think that was both the humaneness for the animal as well as sort of the bigger picture waste was part of why I think this is possible to virtuously raise animals for people to eat as food, is connected with the good that animal is doing that person. And if you take that out of the picture, then part of that nobility of that project is taken away.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, and I think I love when you were describing the cattle, kicking up their heels with joy. What a different life that is than an animal in a, large-scale industrialized animal feeding operation or whatever they call it. Sure. It's just, they don't live a noble life, mm-hmm. and they don't have a noble end.
Yeah.
So I understand why people get squeamish or disagree with animals being treated that way. Right. I'm sure you do too.
Yeah. It's a violation of the respect of the animal. We know how this animal would live in nature to some extent, and it would not be this. And if this is creating the kind of environment where they're only alive because they're on antibiotics, or they're, barely alive, that's clearly not respecting the animal. And of course, we can quickly get into sort of philosophical and theological issues here, but even without going that direction, I think it's just sort of common sense that people recoil when they see harm unnecessarily done to both humans and animals, and for good reason.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. So as just a regular person, I'm not going to go into farming, and probably a lot of our listeners won't either, but what are some things we can do to embrace this kind of life of integrity that you're describing?
That's a really juicy, softball question. I'd love to, go on that for an hour. I'm joking, but basically the more that farmers like myself and customers like yourself can get to know each other, the more we can understand each other's situations. So just for example, I might appreciate, okay, what works well within your kitchen and life and all that. So, all right, you would like for me to cut up chickens. Okay. And you like the boneless thighs, whatever. So I'm trying to work with you to make, what I do fit in with works well with you. And then I might also learn okay, so since you raise your chickens on pasture, it's not good for the birds of the pasture to be out there in the winter. So I understand why I can't get fresh chicken in the winter. And I'm okay with eating frozen chicken in the winter. As opposed to, maybe you didn't know that. And so you say, I want fresh chicken all year, which means you're not going to get pasture raised chicken. You're going to get chicken raised either locally in a warehouse or, shipped from somewhere where it's not winter. So the more that we can both understand each other, I feel like the better we can serve each other, and there would be, less confusion and more benefit to each other, more understanding, more forgiveness, and there's probably more collaboration, more ways that we can work together. So that's kind of a theoretical answer, I guess with a couple of examples, but I guess it would just be to boil it down, just basic consideration for each other and understanding what goes into the work and what it takes to, say, provide for a family. Maybe, for example, and this is dangerous waters here, because I don't want to sound in some way, I don't know, complaining, but say, for example, that if a customer is confused, why is this so expensive, quote unquote, that would be great if the customer could really ask that question. And I could say, well, okay, so here's why it is, because there's this much labor in moving the animal in the pasture, and moving the animal in the pasture is important for these reasons. And the feed costs this much because it's this quality of feed. And there's also the benefits to the local economy that you're not, sending money off to executives that live and care about other places. And there's all these goods that are happening. You know, there's not those illegal aliens who are being exploited in the processing plant. There's not those animals that are being exploited. There's not that land that's being poisoned and exploited. I guess it would be great for people to just go in with goodwill. So know that, you know, I'm not trying to make a million and fool you. I'm trying to do something well and take care of my family. I guess maybe that kind of basic goodwill and wanting to understand each other.
And that practical answer makes sense in terms of the picture of integrity that we were talking about, because I think we've been disconnected from our farms and farmers for so long that we think the food comes from Safeway or Giant. You know, we don't know anything about its source. You know, we've become disconnected. So that one step of knowing a farmer, of understanding what it means to get something local and how it's been raised sustainably can really make a difference in how we relate to our food and to each other.
Right. Food is universal to all human flourishing. So it really is a wonderful way to gather people together. And the more that we can understand and appreciate it from beginning to end, I think it really can have that effect of bringing people together.
Jesse, thank you so much for taking the time today. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, me too. Thanks for talking with me.
Thanks for listening today. If you like what you heard, please review this podcast on iTunes and let the world know. Also, you can find out more about our guests and today's topic by going to our website, westinaprice.org. Click on the word podcast to find more information and pertinent links. If you're interested in finding out more about healthy living in general, look for a Weston A. Price chapter near you. Again, go to our website, westinaprice.org, and click on the sidebar and find a local chapter. You'll find a group of like-minded people in your area that can help you on your journey to optimal health. Again, thanks for listening. Wise Traditions is brought to you by the Weston A. Price Foundation for wise traditions in food farming and the healing arts.